Hey guys, welcome back to Nuke Rev Gaming. Sorry for the delay, it has been quite a while since I last posted a deck profile for you guys. That reason being mostly because I've been building quite a few decks and competing more or less than building decks lately. I do have a couple decks that I want to be able to show you guys here in the next couple weeks. And we're going to be doing an update to my rank 10 Trains deck. As you guys know, this is definitely my favorite deck that I play, so I wanted to show you guys how I have changed it up just a little bit. It does play quite differently from the last time that I showed you guys this deck, but I definitely want to show you guys. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile here. So obviously our first card is going to be our Knight Express Knight. Definitely the most important main deck card, in my opinion. It can be normal summon without tributing, but its attack becomes 0. We all know this, though. It's the big daddy for getting our play started, I'd say close to 90% of the time. So we definitely want to be looking for our Knight Express Knight. Simple, easy. Let's move on. Let's go on to our Heavy Freight Train Derrick Crane. Really liking that new holo re-release in the Infinity Chasers set, by the way. So shout out to Konami for that. This is probably the second most important if you ask me. If an Earth Machine type monster is normal or special summoned, you can special this monster from your hand. And if he's detached from an Xyz monster to activate its effect, then you can just pop a card on the field. So these two are definitely going to be the ones that you're going to be looking for the most, especially when you're going second. You always want to go second with this deck. It can go first, but it doesn't perform nearly as well. You do want to try to OTK with this. So definitely look for these two. They really help out. Next up is our Super Express Bullet Train. We're going to be running 3 of these as well. So if you control all Earth Machine type monsters at a minimum of 1, you can special this card from your hand. And if he was in the graveyard because he was sent there this turn, then during the end phase, you can choose another machine monster in your graveyard. Doesn't have to be an Earth type, doesn't have to be level 10. Add it back to your hand. So this can include, you're probably going to want to go for your Knight Express Knights, your Derrick Cranes, that kind of thing, but you could also choose like your Malefic Cyber End Dragons or any of your level 4s or even your Kaijus that we run in this deck. So it's really versatile for searching from the graveyard, and I really like that. Next, we're going to be running our 2 Flying Pegasus Railroad Stampedes. This guy is really nice as well. When he's normal or special summoned, you can special an Earth Machine type monster from your graveyard in defense position, but its effects are negated. Its second effect, the one you're going to be using quite a lot more, is that it can essentially copy levels from different monsters. So you can target another monster, and you can choose to either change that monster's level, or you can choose to change Stampede's level to that monster's. That may sound a little confusing, but the way that you're basically going to be using this more often than not is you're going to have your Pegasus Stampede out, and let's say you've got your Express Bullet Train. You're essentially going to copy Bullet Train's level to make Pegasus a level 10, just to go into your Xyz plays as usual. So yeah, that card's really great as well, and it does have that graveyard special summoning, so that's also really nice to have when you're kind of more in like late game when you have a lot of monsters in your graveyard. Really helps you set up for that kind of game-ending Xyz play. Next, we've got our classic searcher for this deck, Ruffian Railcar. Basically, you're going to either normal summon this card every now and then. I wouldn't suggest doing it very often unless you, say, like have a limiter removal in hand. That 3600 body with limiter removal can't really be, laughed at very often. But you're going to mainly be using this to get it into the graveyard. And this is so that also during the end phase, if it was sent there this turn, you can search for a level 10 Earth Machine type monster. This card will definitely help you get out of bricks, especially if the field spell can't quite do it as well as you'd like it to. So yeah, Ruffian Railcar, really nice. And like I said, under limiter removal, it can have a really nice play with it where you normal summon this card if it's like the only one you have in your hand. You normal summon it, use limiter removal to get it up to 3600, beat over whatever you can, and then it gets sent to the graveyard during the end of the turn, which means that its effect to search can also be activated during that time, which is really nice. Next, we're going to be running 2 Malefic Cyber End Dragons. I do only run 2. I used to run 3 of these because of its massive body, but I really liked it just at 2. It's a really nice alternative option, especially with a certain tech card that we're running in this deck, because it does have to have a field spell on the board. Usually you're going to have your Revolving Switchyard on the field when this happens, so it's a really nice body. The only downside is that unless you have Skill Drain on the field, if they blow up your field spell, Malefic Cyber End Dragon goes as well. But if it is under Skill Drain, its effects are completely negated, so it doesn't matter. It's just a free 4,000 Peter special summon. Its other drawback is that when it's on the field, it's the only monster that can attack. But again, that's why you really want to bring this card out under skill drain. It is a massive advantage under that. And then we are also going to be running just the one Exodius, the Ultimate Forbidden Lord. It is a level 10, which makes it really nice in this deck. But the reason why you're going to want to be using it a lot more is mostly because of its recycling ability. Its cost to summon it is that you shuffle all monsters in your graveyard back into your deck. Now remember, this is cost, so even if they do negate the special summon, you still get that graveyard recursion back into your deck either way, because it is the cost to summon that card. Next up, we're going to be running our Kaiju engine, so we're going to be running 3 Jizukiro, and Jizukiro is really nice because if you do Kaiju your opponent, then that means you can actually special a Jizukiro. It is a level 10 machine monster, so that is why we do run the 3 in this deck. We're going to be running one Humongous, the Sticky String Kaiju, and of course the Big Daddy, Gamma-Sil, the Sea Turtle Kaiju, or I should say the Small Daddy, but this is definitely the one you're going to be wanting to give your opponent the most, so... yeah, that's our Kaiju engine, and now moving on to the main deck hand traps. We've got our 3 Ash Blossom and our 2 Effect Veilers. So that's going to be our monster lineup. Let me go ahead and get those out of the way, and we will move on to the spells of the deck. So we've got our 3 field spells. The Revolving Switchyards. This one's going to be getting you out of a lot of bricks and just a lot of bad hands in general. It does have 2 effects. The main effect that you're going to be using is that you can discard any 1 card and search a level 10 Earth Machine type monster. Its second effect that you're not going to be using quite as often, but I've noticed is really nice in like late game situations or like post Exodius, for example, is you can summon, if you summon in a level 10 Earth Machine type monster, you can special summon a level 4 Earth Machine type monster from your deck, and its level becomes 10. The only downside to this is that your opponent takes no damage for the rest of the turn. However, sometimes you're not really trying to go for that. Sometimes you really just want to disrupt your opponent, so that effect can really be nice. We're also, of course, going to be running 2 Terraforming in this deck. That's kind of mandatory. You really want to have those 5 copies of Revolving Switchyard, especially during your first round. This time around, we're actually only running 2 limiter removals. I've noticed that 3 sometimes tends to brick your hand just a little bit, so I decided to bring it down to 2, which is really nice. It leaves a lot more options for destruction cards, like our next card here, which is going to be our Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. So this kind of acts as sort of like a Raigeki that gives you a Jizukiro to go into Xyz play zone. Basically, you use this card and it destroys as many monsters on the field as possible, including your own, so it's more like a dark hole, I guess. And then you special summon a Kaiju onto both sides of the field. You're going to give your opponent the Gamma-Sil, and you're going to give yourself the Jizukiro. That way you can go off of that into your Xyz plays. The other nice thing about this card is the turn after that you use this card, that it goes to the graveyard, you can banish it from your graveyard to add a Kaiju to your hand, which is also really nice, again, for more disruption and more destruction plays to just get rid of your opponent's problem monsters. Then we've got a couple classic staple cards. We've got our Monster Reborn, and we have a Raigeki. We also have a Twin Twisters. There are Mystic Minds rolling around right now, and it's always nice to just have spell and trap removal. You do have your Xyz monster, your Super Dimensional Robot Galaxy Destroyer, but Twin Twisters is always nice to have. And we've got a couple draw cards. We do have 1 Pot of Desires and 1 Day of Peace. So this card is actually pretty new to this lineup. The reason I have the 1 Day of Peace is because I've noticed that especially if you are not able to OTK or you go into the OTK, your boss monsters tend to be a little bit more vulnerable. So if you can't quite get the OTK, I do highly recommend using the 1 Day of Peace during your main phase 2 after you've attempted to go into OTK range. This way, it prevents your opponent from basically killing you that next turn. So it gives you another turn to kind of extend yourself and just kind of finish them off. They aren't able to do any damage to you until the end of their turn after you use this. But they both get to draw a card, which I guess isn't the worst thing with this deck. You're really doing it so that you can draw a card and so that your opponent can't kill you next turn. We've also got one Heavy Storm Duster, and of course the Skill Drain as well. Heavy Storm Duster, I basically am just using it because I have the one Twin Twisters. I would highly recommend just using 2 Twin Twisters. And Skill Drain, very important, especially when when you're facing a deck that just continuously uses monster effects. Especially decks like Phantom Knights, Burning Abyss, those kind of decks. You really want to get that Skill Drain now. It really helps with your Night Express Knight just being a free 3,000 beater. I mean, that's kind of the thing with this deck. Skill Drain really helps you rather than, doesn't help you, I guess. So yeah, that's also just really nice. So that's actually it for the main deck. So let's go ahead and move on to our extra deck. We're going to be running 2 of our Rail Cannon Super Doras. This is probably the one that if you're forced to go first, you're going to be going into this one quite a lot. Because it has a quick effect where, well, not necessarily a quick effect, but during either player's turn, you can detach a material from it, target any one monster on the field, and that monster is unaffected by all card effects except for its own. You're mostly going to be targeting Super Dora, so that way you can go into your bigger Xyz next turn, especially if you're forced to go first. It also prevents your opponent from extra linking you, unless they have Kaijus, of course. And yeah, it's really nice for that. Next up, we've got our other monster. We've got our Gustav Max. This is the one you're going to be going into most of the time when you are going in for the OTK. Basically, your OTK play is you're going to go into Gustav Max, burn them for 2,000, which is that's effect, and then you're going to be going into this guy, Juggernaut Libe. His effect is that you can detach a material, and its attack. It gains 2,000 attack permanently, and it can attack as many times as it has materials +1. So usually when you go into him, he's going to have 2 materials because you've used 1 material for Gustav Max, meaning that he can attack monsters 3 times a turn. And with 6,000 attack, most of the time it's not going to be a problem because a lot of the times you're going to be detaching your heavy freight train Derricrane from your Gustav Max, meaning that you're probably going to get to pop the 1 or 2 monsters that are going to be a problem. So most of the time you're going to be attacking directly for 6,000 after you've been burned them for 2,000, which is exactly 8,000, hence the OTK. That's going to be your classic play that you're going to go into if they can't stop you. Next up, we've got our one robot Galaxy Destroyer. This guy's just got a Harpy's Feather Duster effect. Now, the fun thing about this card is, especially if you're playing a deck that has a lot of like back row disruption, sometimes I like to go into Galaxy Destroyer, even though he's a little more difficult to go into. He is still very reliable. With that effect, he does take 3. But again, you're gonna detach your Derricrane, blow up their back row, and they can't actually respond with back row to its effect. So they do have to get rid of it upon the summon, which does unfortunately happen quite often. So take your risks with this card. Remember, just keep in mind that it is very vulnerable, but also remember that you can actually go into Juggernaut Libe off of Galaxy Destroyer. So you can theoretically use this card's effect and then Xyz summon into Libe to like try to finish them off if they have just like back row disruption. It is a viable play. Next up, we've got our Tarantula, our Pain Gainer, and our 7 Sins. Pain Gainer is probably the one that you're not actually going to use. You're really just going to use it to get into 7 Sins with 4 to 5 material. Now Ravenous Tarantula, he's really the one that you're going to want to use quite a lot other than 7 Sins. Ravenous Tarantula actually makes all monsters you control gain attack equal to the difference between your opponent's life points and yours. So especially in late game situations, if you're losing by quite a lot, Ravenous Tarantula can really even the playing field. And remember, it does increase the attack of all monsters you control. So, theoretically, if you had 1,000 life points and they have 8,000 to 9,000 life points, all monsters you control are going to gain 7 to 8,000 attacks. So it can be kind of ridiculous with the beat potential of this card. Again, Pain Gainer, you're really just going to use to go into 7 Sins, and 7 Sins is kind of an alternate boss monster. I love to use him late in game because of the fact that it takes so much just to kill him. So 7 Sins, you can detach a material from him instead of allowing him to die, so every time he would die, you just detach. And a lot of the times, you're going to be going into him with 3, 4, about 4 materials, maybe even 5, depending on what you're going into, I guess. And so he's going to take a lot to kill. And then also, if you summoned him with the spiders overlaying galaxy style on top of each other, then you can't use this second effect until the next turn. But during your next turn, you can detach 2 materials from him and then banish all monsters your opponent controls and then attach one of them to him as material, which is pretty goddamn broken if you ask me. But, it's a really nice alternate boss monster to go into. So that's going to be it for our Xyz monsters, though. Yeah, we don't just have Xyz monsters in here this time. We do have a couple links. We've got our Platinum Gadget, which can really help us with summoning, say, our Pegasus. And also, if you want to summon a rail card, that's really great for it too. And we also have our Cleafort Genius, which can be really nice. Cleafort Genius he's unaffected by all other spell effects and the effects of other Link monsters, but he also has an effect to where he can choose 1 card on each side of the field, and their effects are negated. So worst case scenario, you can actually make your Night Express Knights effects negated, for example, or your, Malefic Cyber End Dragon, and their effects are negated for the rest of that turn. So you can beat over with your Night Express Knight for that turn or something. But also, you're negating an effect on your opponent's side of the field, and it's any card, so you can negate like a field spell or something like that. So yeah, those are our Link monsters, and we do have 1 Synchro monster. We've got our 1 Star Eater. It is a level 11 Synchro, which is really nice for this deck. Basically, its effect is that it can't be negated. The summon can't be negated. And when Synchro summoned, cards and effects cannot be activated. And if it attacks, it is unaffected by all other cards until the end of the damage step. So again, it's just a nice beater. It's got a 3200 attack. So, I don't tend to go into it very often, but it's really nice to have. And I thought it was a nice alternative to, say, like Sky Palace Gangaradai, which I don't really ever use that often, so... And lastly, for the extra deck, we've got 2 Cyber End Dragons for our Malefic Cyber End Dragon. Honestly, I'm kind of making room for whenever the Doubleheader Anger Knuckle card comes out. That's the Trains Link card. So I don't quite have 15 in there, but I am still waiting for that. So let's move on to the side deck. This is probably the most flexible part of the deck. So kind of take this with a grain of salt, or kind of like use this as like a template for your side deck. So we do start off with the 2 Droll and Lockbirds. I would main deck these sometimes, but however, I tend to not be able to use them very often. So if you're playing a deck that just continuously adds cards to the hand, maybe side these in and take out your Pot of Desires and your 1 Day of Peace, just to have a little bit extra disruption. And we've got our 1 Metaion the Time Lord. I do only just have the 1 Time Lord in here this time, and this is mostly because, Metaion's really good in this deck. He is a level 10, but he does take up your normal summon. However, he works with the deck in both his level, and his effect is that it can send all monsters back to the hand except for itself, and then it burns for, I believe, 300 damage for each monster that is sent back to the hand. So that's a really nice effect, and it kind of ties into the OTK. It also ties into, say, for example, if you're just trying to burn your opponent, or you're just trying to, maybe you're going into time or something like that, this is a really nice card to have in your side deck. So this next card, I'm probably going to get a lot of hatred for, but I have used it quite a bit in trains since this card came out. We do run 2 Mystic Mines. Now this card, like I said, I'm going to get a lot of hate for this card, but I've noticed that it works really well with trains, since you're technically, most of the time you're sitting on just 1 monster. Usually your Xyz monster. What I like to do with this card when I side it in is I will go into my revolving switchyard, get my cards that I need to go into the Xyz plays, do my damage, all of that stuff, and then during the second main phase, I will actually switch out my switchyard for Mystic Mine, and then just kind of sit on, say, a Super Dora. I usually like to go into this card when I know my opponent is going to make me go first. And it's worked really well, honestly. I would suggest running 2 Metaverse in this deck. I just simply don't have 2 Metaverse for this deck, so I don't have them running in here right now. I do have 2 spaces in my side deck for it, though, but I would suggest if you're going to run 2 Mystic Mines, run 2 Metaverse. That way you can, kind of pop this on them after they've, for example, loaded their field with monsters. You know, you're going to be sitting on like 1 or 2 monsters max, so it's not a bad idea to run it, I think. We also run 2 Gozen Match, of course. Gozen Match is going to be really nice for our deck. You might want to run Rivalry of Warlords as well, because that can actually do for machines rather than for just, for example, Earth monsters. I like to do it for Earth monsters, partially because a lot of people tend to use cards that, yes, they tend to have the same type, but they don't have the same attribute. You know, decks like Sky Striker, for example, they can't even attempt to summon the next Link monster because Gozen Match is on the field, for example. So I like to use Gozen Match to like lock my opponent out of things. It does sometimes lock you out of it, but it's really important to make sure your opponent can't summon monsters either, because of how great the beating potential is with this deck. Next, we've got our Solemn package, where we're going to be running 2 Solemn Strikes, a Solemn Judgment, and a Solemn Warning. Just classic negation cards, really. You want to have these, especially if you're not able to disrupt your opponent the way you want to with, say, like any of the other cards in here. That's kind of the theme of my side deck, is mostly just disruption, like generic disruption. So I do like to have the Solemn package in here. And we also, lastly for the side deck, we run 2 Magic Cylinder. Now the Magic Cylinder, again, I would only suggest using Magic Cylinder when you're forced to go first. The reason for this is mostly because you want to be able to go into Super Dora. That way it kind of forces your opponent to try to beat over you with something like Boral Sword. And when they do that, you have your Magic Cylinder to counter that as well. So if your opponent does make you go first, make sure to side in your Magic Cylinders and probably your Mystic Mines, something like that. Or really just all the trap cards in this deck, plus the field spell. You could really side all of those out. I've done that before, and it works really well. It can kind of turn trains into sort of like a beatdown control deck, sort of. It doesn't work as well as just the main deck, but if you're really trying to stop your opponent from doing things, then that's probably the way to go. And Magic Cylinder also is just kind of a personal favorite of mine. I've won my fair share of games off of it, and it gets pretty hilarious when you flip a Magic Cylinder on somebody, because they're never expecting it. What can I say? But that's going to be the entire deck. Let me know what you guys think. A couple cards that I would suggest maybe consider running. Urgent Schedule, for example. A lot of Cyber Dragon players, I've noticed, like to use this as well. You summon a level 5 or lower, or a level 5 or higher monster from your deck if your opponent controls more monsters than you. So that would be like a Pegasus and a Daracrane or something like that. Another one that I might suggest running, maybe run 2 Pot of Desires if you really think the draw engine needs it, or an Upstart Goblin. I would highly recommend a card like Iron Draw, although Iron Draw has the side effect of you can only special summon 1 more time after you use it, so you better be using it right before you go into your Xyz plays. Other than that, if you want to go for a more beatdown style deck, I might suggest running a 3rd limiter removal. And maybe run your Sky Palace Gangardai if you really think that the popping 1 card for 1,000 burn damage is going to be more useful to you than, say, like a Star Eater. Then definitely go for it. But definitely leave your suggestions in the comments, guys. I'm more than willing to look at you guys' suggestions and maybe even altering my own deck, you know, to accommodate for that. You know, give me some strategies and that kind of thing. And I will definitely be building some more decks for you guys. I'm actually building an Exodia control deck at the moment, and I'm also rebuilding my Skull Servant deck, so that'll be really fun to show you guys. But yeah, thanks for watching this deck profile, guys, and I will see you later. Peace out.